What is a pivot chart? A pivot chart is a visual presentation of a pivot table in Excel. Pivot charts and pivot tables both are connected with each other. So let's go to the data comparison sheet and use the same old raw data. So I will go to the insert tab and I have this option pivot charts. Now the pivot chart option has two layers. I can directly click on the bar graph and go and it will create a pivot chart for me, or I can use this down arrow option and I have two options, pivot chart and pivot table. So I will just go with pivot chart at the moment. Click on existing worksheet, locate where I want the chart. I want the chart to be displayed here. Click on OK. And I have the layout. I have the pivot table field list layout. I have chart layouts. So when I click on the chart layout, I have all the fields as per the charts. I have the legends, axis, values, filters, and when I click on the pivot table layout, I have my old pivot table field list. I have filters, columns, rows, and values. So let's arrange the data. I will move the date to rows. I will move the total revenue to values twice because let's compare the data like we did in the previous example. Now I don't want month or rather dates I have. So let's see what I have. I will go to right click. I will just do this again. I will right click, go to group, and I will just deselect months. So I will click on OK. So now I have months, I have quarters, and I have years. So I will just bring this here little, and I can just rename this sales, and as soon as I press enter, the legends on the chart changes as well. And I can just right click this and hide all field buttons on charts. So I have more space on the chart to display my data. And now I have a comparison on the chart, but there is no comparison as such at the moment. Although sales and the difference look identical. So I will just right click this, go to value field settings. I hope you remember this, we did in the last class. Go to show values as, use this option difference from previous, click on OK, and I have the difference. I can simply move this or I can resize. So I have a negative in quarter 3. So the main advantage of a pivot chart is that it is dynamic. So moment you change or the moment you make changes in your pivot table report, the same is being reflected immediately in your chart. Now there is another way to bring up a pivot chart. Let's say, for example, you don't have this chart, you just have a pivot report. So all you got to do is press Alt and F1, and here you have the chart. And then you can make some modification. You can just hide these buttons, and you can change the legend and other fields as well. So this is just another way to bring up a pivot chart from an existing pivot table report. Moving on to next, we have pivot chart slicers. I hope we have already discussed about slicers and we have already discussed about pivot chart. So now we have pivot chart slicers. So I have this small data in front of me. I have region and I have the product names. So I will quickly convert this data into a chart by pressing Alt F1. So I have the chart. I can just arrange the chart right below the data. I don't need the chart title at the moment, so I can just remove this. So I have more space for my data bars, and I have all the 4 regions, and I have all the products. So now I can simply go to the design tab, and I can go to insert, and I can use slicer, and I have this slicer. Now if I have the region, I have 4 regions, and I have 8 products. So I have all here, but I don't find them relevant if I have to use a slicer for any of the products. So let's select few and see how it goes. Click on OK, and I have beverages, but I have the value of sales, which I don't need. So I will just delete this. I will just delete this product as well. So I will just use the region slicer. I can use this. I can modify. I can just change the formatting and all those things, which we have seen in the last class. And now, if I want to see the data for East Coast, I can use the East Coast slicer button, and I have the data change in the table and in the chart as well. And if I have to compare two data, I can use the control button key from my keyboard and use the north coast button, and I have the comparison. And likewise, I can also include south coast, and I can just clear out, and I have all the four regions. Now, for you to insert a slicer, you have to first convert your data into a table. My data is converted into a table, only then I can insert a slicer. So this is all about pivot chart slicers. Here we are just using a small data. We are not using a pivot chart report actually. So that doesn't matter a lot. You just have to use the data, and you have the chart and you have the slicer.